If there was one thing Dr. Thalia Brisk hated more than the taste of recycled coffee, it was the smug silence of a remote research base in the middle of nowhere. And when she said middle of nowhere, she meant the unfortunate armpit of space's galaxy. But here she was, perched on the edge of sanity, staring at alien artifacts like a desperate archaeologist at an empty tomb. "I'd kill for a decent cup," she grumbled, though she wasn't sure if she meant the coffee or the relief from this god-awful boredom. The artifacts, on the other hand, weren't talking. Silent types, the lot of them, probably in league with the coffee machine. "Dr. Brisk," a voice crackled over the intercom, as lively as a tax audit. "We've got company." She nearly spilled the ersatz coffee down her lab coat. "Company? We're a top-secret facility, Arlo. Where the hell would we get company from?" Arlo, her assistant who somehow managed to look simultaneously overcaffeinated and sleep-deprived, strolled in, eyes half-lidded with the confidence of a man who hadn't been outside in months. "Not the human kind," he replied with a smirk that suggested he'd been waiting all day to drop that bombshell. "Great," she sighed, abandoning her mug in a fit of dramatics. "Aliens, just what we need." The company wasn't a ship or some floating extraterrestrial salesman offering intergalactic vacuum cleaners. It was a signal, a strange one at that, emanating from the artifacts they were studying. And like a stubborn hangover, it refused to be ignored. Thalia stared at the blinking lights on the console as if they held the answers to life, the universe, and why the hell her hair was always frizzy. "What is it doing?" "Beeping," Arlo said helpfully. "Lots of beeping." "Fantastic," she muttered, pressing buttons with the finesse of a raccoon rifling through a trash can. "Let's see if we can figure out what our alien friends are trying to say." "Maybe they just want a cup of coffee," Arlo shrugged, earning a glare that could freeze the sun. The artifacts, squat and ugly like alien doorstops, sat in their containment fields, glowing with a sickly light that suggested they were either communicating or gearing up for the world's worst disco. The signal pulsed, resonating in a way that made Thalia's fillings vibrate. "You think it's a distress call?" Arlo asked, his voice tinged with the kind of morbid curiosity that typically ended with someone losing an arm. "Distress or trap, who knows?" Thalia replied dryly. "Maybe they're just tired of us poking them with sticks." As if on cue, the base lights flickered, dimming to a level that had nothing to do with ambience and everything to do with foreboding. The base security system kicked in, locking down faster than a tax collector spotting a loophole. "Ah, damn," Thalia muttered. "Full lockdown, that's just fantastic." Arlo tapped away at his console, his expression somewhere between intrigued and "I should have been a pastry chef." "Looks like it's coming from the artifacts. Whatever it is, it's got our systems on edge." "Amazing," Thalia drawled, throwing her hands up. "Our multi-billion credit facility brought to its knees by a bunch of space rocks." "Never underestimate the power of inanimate objects," Arlo said. "Remember when my toaster tried to stage a coup?" "Hard to forget," she replied, recalling the time she'd been besieged by flying toast. "Let's just figure out what this signal wants before we all end up as interstellar toast." The base wasn't big, but it was labyrinthine, a twist of corridors that felt like they were designed by someone who hated straight lines and easy navigation. Thalia and Arlo made their way to the central hub, where the rest of her team, a motley group of scientists, techies, and one guy who claimed he was just there for the snacks, huddled around various screens. "Status," Thalia barked, channeling her inner drill sergeant as she strode into the room. "Panicked," said Sierra, the team's resident engineer and unofficial provider of cynicism. "Seems the artifacts have decided to phone home." "Lovely," Thalia replied. "Did they leave a message?" Sierra snorted. "Just a lot of static and a creepy light show." "So, typical alien hospitality package," Arlo commented, leaning over Sierra's shoulder. "We tried to scramble the signal," Sierra continued, "but it's like it has its own agenda." "Figures," Thalia said, watching the screens dance with cryptic lights. "All right, let's see if we can figure out what this thing is up to and how screwed we are." "On a scale of 1 to utterly," Arlo quipped. "Surprise me," she replied, rubbing her temples. "Let's start by not panicking." "Too late," muttered Greg, the guy who'd been promised snacks and not an impending alien apocalypse. The signal's pattern was erratic, sometimes sounding like a child's attempt at a piano recital, other times like a dying fax machine. Whatever it was persistent. If we can't figure out the language, Thalia mused, maybe we can at least track its source. Or maybe it's trying to track us, Sierra added with a grim smile, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Well, we're not exactly hiding, Thalia said, more like sitting ducks in a shooting gallery. I always loved duck, Greg said, earning a collective groan. The base shuddered, the walls vibrating as if they were trying to escape. Might want to hold that thought. Arlo said, I think our friends are getting restless. Thalia bit back a curse. All right, team, let's get proactive. If those artifacts are getting ready to do more than send a signal, we need to be ready. Ready for what? Greg asked, his eyes wide. For anything. Thalia snapped, trying to ignore the knot in her stomach that suggested anything could encompass a range of unpleasant outcomes. As the team scrambled to decipher the signal, Thalia couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something vital, like the punchline to a cosmic joke. The artifacts sat in their containers, pulsing ominously, a silent reminder that even in a universe filled with wonders, humanity had a particular knack for stumbling into trouble. On the bright side, Arlo said, trying for optimism, at least we're not bored anymore. Yeah, Thalia replied, casting a wary glance at the artifacts. Small comforts. The room fell into a tense quiet, the only sound the relentless beeping of the alien signal as they all awaited whatever fresh hell was about to unfold. The room buzzed with a flurry of activity, and the kind of tension you'd expect in a courtroom where everyone's guilty. Thalia watched her team, a collection of smart people doing their best to look like they knew what they were doing, which was impressive since she'd bet half of them were winging it. Particularly Greg, who was now eyeing the coffee machine like it owed him money. Arlo, fiddling with the console, looked up, his eyes slightly glazed from too much caffeine and not enough sleep. So, I've got news. Depends on whether you like your existential dread served with a side of oh crap. Surprise me, Thalia replied, arms crossed as she leaned against a console that was probably worth more than her entire education. Well, the signal's content turns out it's a message, a helpful little alien PSA. Please tell me it comes with a manual, Sierra said, her hands twirling a pen with the dexterity of a magician about to pull a rabbit from nowhere. Ha, we wish. Arlo snorted. It's basically an attempt to cure humanity. Thalia raised an eyebrow. Cure us. What do we have, Space Flu? From what I can gather, Arlo gestured to a screen filled with symbols that looked like a toddler's art project. It's meant to fix what they see as our primary flaw. Oh, this should be good, Thalia said, leaning closer. And what flaw would that be? Violence, Arlo said with a shrug. Apparently we're too stab-happy for the cosmic neighborhood. Greg piped up. Guess they've never played a session of spacecraft. Violence is half the fun. Sierra's pen paused mid-spin. So they're saying they can turn off our violent tendencies, just like that? Thalia sighed. And here I thought therapy was already a questionable science. Now we've got aliens doing it remotely. Remotely but effectively, Arlo added. What's the saying? There's no problem a little brainwashing can't fix. Or make infinitely worse, Thalia said. Let me guess this cure isn't optional, is it? Seems like a universal update, Arlo nodded. No opt-out button. The room fell into a thoughtful silence, pierced only by the ominous beep of the console. Thalia could feel the unease thickening like soup left too long on a burner, and judging by the looks on their faces, the rest of the team was thinking the same thing. What if turning us into pacifists made us sitting ducks for the first interstellar jerk who didn't get the memo? All right, Thalia declared, breaking the silence. We need to figure out how close this update is to going live, and more importantly, how to stop it. Stopping it might not be an option, Sierra pointed out. These artifacts, they're not just here for show, they're like transmitters. If they start broadcasting planet-wide, we'll all be the universe's friendliest zombies. Great, Thalia muttered, rubbing her temples. So we're not just sitting on a ticking time bomb, we're sitting on a bomb that wants to hug us to death. On the bright side, Arlo interjected, we could all just learn to play the ukulele. Greg snorted. Yeah, let's start a band. The Pacifist Apocalypse. Not like we have an alien invasion to worry about or anything. Thalia shot him a look. Greg, You've just volunteered to help Sierra with technical support. I want you guys to figure out if there's any way to jam this transmission before it fries our brains." Greg gulped but nodded. There was a sudden shift in the room as the reality settled in. They weren't just scientists in a floating tin can. They were humanity's last line of defense against enforced niceness. Arlo continued tapping away, his eyes flicking between the screens and Thalia. "Say we managed to stop it here. What's to stop them from trying again, or doing it somewhere else? That's the question, isn't it?" Thalia replied, her voice more tired than she'd admit. "We're playing a game of intergalactic whack-a-mole and we're not even sure where the moles are popping up. Can't we just reason with them?" Sierra asked, half joking. "Send a message back, thanks, but we're good with our rage issues." "Sure," Thalia quipped, "and when that doesn't work we'll try sacrificing Greg." "Hey," Greg protested, though his voice lacked real conviction. "I've got plans, you know." They shared a chuckle, the kind of gallows humor that came when you knew you were standing on the precipice of something big and potentially world-ending. The laughter was a thin veneer over the underlying tension, but it was better than screaming. As the team returned to their tasks, Thalia's mind raced. The artifacts sat there in their containment fields, pulsing like the universe's worst heartbeat. What kind of civilization decided that the best way to introduce themselves was by rewriting your DNA with a smiley face and "have a nice day"? Arlo's voice broke through her thoughts. "So, Thalia, if this goes sideways, what's plan B?" "Plan B," Thalia echoed, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "The old turn it off and on again never fails, right?" Sound advice, Arlo grinned, though the humor didn't reach his eyes. "Assuming, of course, the off switch doesn't just make things worse." "Always a possibility," Thalia conceded. "But what choice do we have? We either figure out how to stop this thing, or we become a footnote in someone else's galactic history." "Guess I'd better start writing my memoirs," Arlo said. "Maybe get famous posthumously." "Ah, a classic move," Sierra chimed in, barely looking up from her console. "Die first, get famous later. Works every time." Their banter was interrupted by a sudden spike in activity from the artifacts. The lights flashed in a sequence that might have been beautiful if it weren't so ominous. Beeps turned to a steady hum, a sound that wormed its way into Thalia's bones, thrumming like a far-off storm. Greg looked up, his face pale. "I think they're warming up." Thalia cursed under her breath. "Arlo, can you get us a read on how much time we have?" "Working on it," he replied, fingers flying over the keys like a pianist in a high-stakes concert. The lights in the room flickered again, a reminder of how precarious their situation was, as if the universe thought they needed more ambience for their impending doom. Finally, Arlo spoke, his voice tight. "Best guess, we've got maybe an hour before these things start broadcasting full force." "An hour," Thalia repeated, feeling the weight of the words settle over her like a lead blanket. "All right, people, let's get cracking. We've got 60 minutes to save the world, no pressure." "Never thought I'd say this," Sierra said, "but I miss boring days." Greg nodded. "Right, when all we had to worry about was whether the coffee tasted like reconstituted socks." Thalia allowed herself a tight smile. "We'll drink to that once this is over, assuming we still remember how to drink." "Hey," Arlo said, his eyes not leaving his screen, "how hard can stopping an alien signal be? We've got brain power and sarcasm. That's half the battle, right?" "That and a bit of luck," Thalia replied, though she suspected they'd need more than luck. The room was a blur of activity, everyone working in sync, a testament to their training, their resolve, and maybe just a little bit of desperation. But as the minutes ticked by, Thalia couldn't shake the feeling that they were racing against more than just a clock. They were up against an unknown force with motives they barely understood, holding humanity's future in its cold, alien hands. The irony was not lost on her. Here they were, at the edge of the universe, about to be undone not by fire or fury, but by enforced peace. Somewhere out there, some cosmic entity was surely having a good laugh at their expense. "All right, we've got a plan," Thalia called out, her voice cutting through the chatter. "We'll try to isolate one of the artifacts and disrupt its signal. If we can interfere with even one, it might cause a cascade failure. Or it might blow up in our faces," Sierra pointed out, ever the realist. Small price to pay for continued bad coffee, Arlo said, giving Thalia a nod. Okay, team, Thalia said, taking a deep breath. Let's show these aliens what happens when you mess with humanity. Let's make them regret ever thinking they could cure us. With renewed determination, they worked against the Countdown, a ragtag group of misfits standing between the universe's most misguided intervention and the survival of their flawed, imperfect, beautifully chaotic species. And if that wasn't worth fighting for, then nothing was. The research base was a symphony of chaos and not the good kind. Lights blinked erratically as if the facility was trying to communicate its own existential dread. The hum of the artifacts grew louder, morphing into a low, menacing growl. It was the sound of impending doom, with a beat you couldn't dance to. Thalia squinted at the console, which now displayed a mess of gibberish that could have been an alien shopping list for all she knew. All right, team, the base is losing its mind and I need everyone to keep theirs intact. We've got hallucinations and paranoia setting in, so let's try not to lose it completely. Arlo, sporting bags under his eyes that could double as carry-on luggage, snorted. Oh great, hallucinations, as if sleep deprivation wasn't enough of a trip. Greg leaned against the coffee machine, a fixture he'd grown attached to almost romantically. This thing's been spitting out brown sludge for weeks. If I start seeing pink elephants, I'm blaming it, not the aliens. Hey, if you're lucky, maybe the elephants will serve decent espresso. Sierra chimed in, scribbling notes as if she was penning the next great space opera. Just try not to hug them. Thalia rolled her eyes, though a smirk tugged at her lips. This was what she loved about her team. Even when the world or universe was going to hell, they kept their sarcasm sharp and their spirits sharper. All right, Focus. We need a plan, Doctor. Brisk, you've got the floor. Doctor. Thalia Brisk, juggling her title with the grace of a circus performer, leaned in. Here's the deal. These artifacts are influencing the base's systems and by extension us. We need a countermeasure and fast. Something to keep our heads on straight while we figure out how to disrupt the signal. Greg looked skeptical, which was his default look. And by countermeasure, I'm assuming you mean something more than tinfoil hats. Exactly, Thalia said, ignoring the jab. I propose we rig up a feedback loop. Use the base's own systems to create interference. Feedback loop. Sierra raised an eyebrow. You're suggesting we play the aliens' game of telephone and hope it scrambles the message enough to buy us time. More or less, Thalia admitted. Think of it as a risky remix, but it'll take teamwork and trust, so no going off the deep end. Well, I'm all in for dramatic solutions, Arlo said, rubbing his temples. What's the worst that could happen? The base turns into a haunted house ride. Haunted house sounds about right, Greg muttered, glancing around. My skin's crawling, and it's not because of the temperature. Right, Thalia said, ignoring the creepy-crawly feeling that was spreading through her own limbs. Arlo, you and Greg work on rerouting the systems. Sierra, I need you to document everything. We might need a record if this goes south. Documenting our last stand. Got it, Sierra replied with a wry grin. All right, team, Thalia said, the weight of command pressing down like a bad hangover. Let's make some noise. They dispersed, diving into their tasks with the kind of resigned determination only found in people who have realized they're stuck in a bad movie plot. Arlo and Greg huddled over a mess of wires and screens, their banter a comforting hum against the backdrop of impending disaster. Pass me that wire, Arlo said, waving a hand. No, not that one. The one that looks like it could electrocute a small planet. Greg handed it over, his expression one of grim amusement. You sure you know what you're doing, or are we just crossing wires and hoping not to blow up? I've got a vague idea, Arlo replied, squinting at a cluster of tangled cables. Think of it as an extremely high-stakes game of operation. Great, now I feel super confident, Greg muttered. Meanwhile, Sierra recorded the unfolding chaos with the detachment of a journalist in a war zone. Day whatever it is of the alien intervention, she narrated to her pen. Spirits are high, caffeine levels are low, and someone keeps humming the theme to intergalactic Armageddon. Thalia, standing at the center of the storm, felt a pang of pride. Her team might be a ragtag bunch of misfits, but they were her misfits, and if anyone could pull off a miracle, it was them. Thalia, Arlo called, looking up. "We've got a problem. Just one," Thalia quipped, joining them. "Because if it's a choice between the base exploding and us turning into pacifists, I'm not sure which is preferable." "The system's fighting back," Arlo explained, gesturing at the screen where data danced erratically. "Every time we try to reroute the signal, it's like the artifacts anticipate us. It's adapting." "Fantastic," Thalia muttered, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Alien tech with a mind of its own, just what we needed." Greg looked at her, his usual humor replaced by something darker. "Thalia, if this doesn't work, what's your real plan B?" She sighed, torn between honesty and reassurance. "We keep trying until we can't anymore. We're scientists, Greg. We do what we do best, improvise." "Improvise," he repeated, nodding slowly. "All right, let's keep at it then." And so they did. The team worked tirelessly, driven by the kind of stubborn determination that could only come from knowing the stakes. They pushed through fatigue and fear. Each step forward met with 2 steps back, but they kept moving. Eventually, Thalia called for a break, a luxury but a necessary one. They regrouped in the mess hall, the flickering lights casting strange shadows on their faces. Arlo was the first to speak, his voice low. "We're hitting a wall. The system's too integrated. It's like trying to detangle a galaxy-sized knot." "Maybe we're going about this the wrong way," Sierra mused, twirling her pen. "What if we stop treating it like a monster and treat it like a puzzle instead?" Greg snorted. "A puzzle that wants to lobotomize us. Fun." "She's right," Thalia said, eyes narrowing in thought. "We've been on the defensive, reacting instead of acting. We need to outthink it." Arlo perked up. "How about a diversion? Something to throw it off its game while we work on the main plan." "Like a digital smoke bomb," Greg suggested, sipping his coffee with a grimace. "Something to scramble its sensors long enough for us to slip in." "Exactly," Thalia agreed, her mind racing. "If we can create a phantom signal, mimic the interference, it might buy us enough time to get the feedback loop online." "Great," Arlo said, rubbing his hands together. "Let's give the alien tech a taste of human ingenuity." Sierra chuckled, her laughter a small beacon of hope. "I knew all those hours of watching bad heist movies would pay off." The plan was set, and once again they threw themselves into the fray. The console was a battlefield, the clatter of keys the sound of war. Thalia watched, her heart pounding with every beep and flicker as the team worked their magic. Time slipped away, the countdown relentless. Each second was a reminder of how close they were to either saving the world or becoming its footnote, but they pushed on, refusing to give in. Finally, Arlo let out a triumphant whoop. "We've got it, phantom signals online." The base shuddered, the lights flickering as the alien tech reacted. But instead of shutting down, the signal wavered, its oscillations stuttering like a drunk trying to find his way home. Thalia held her breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. When nothing exploded, she allowed herself a small, shaky smile. "All right, let's finish this." With renewed focus, they worked to complete the feedback loop, each step forward a battle of wits against a force that was both alien and eerily familiar. The base creaked and groaned, its systems straining under the pressure. But then with a final keystroke, it was done. The loop engaged, the feedback roaring to life like a caged beast finally set free. The artifacts shuddered, their eerie glow flickering as the signal faltered. "We did it," Greg said, his voice breathless with disbelief. "We actually did it." But Thalia wasn't ready to celebrate just yet. "Keep monitoring," she ordered. "We need to make sure this holds." Hours passed, tense and expectant, but the signal remained disrupted, the artifacts dormant. Finally, when exhaustion threatened to claim them all, Thalia called it. "We've done it," she said, her voice thick with relief. "We've really done it." The team erupted into cheers, the sound triumphant and ragged. They'd faced the impossible and come out the other side. They'd beaten back the darkness, if only for a moment. Thalia looked at her team, her heart swelling with pride. They were tired, battered, but victorious. They'd proven what humanity was truly capable of when pushed to the brink. And somewhere out there, some alien civilization would have to think twice before messing with the human race again. Because if there was one thing they'd learned, it was this: you don't mess with a species that thrives on chaos. Greg raised his half-empty mug in a mock toast. "Humanity," he said, grinning. "Long may we rage." They clinked their mugs, the sound echoing through the base, a reminder of their indomitable spirit. And as they sat together surrounded by the remnants of their victory, Thalia realized that they were more than just scientists on a remote base. They were a team, a family, bound by shared struggle and triumph. And if that wasn't worth fighting for, then nothing was. The base had been teetering on the brink of oblivion for a good while now, like a drunk leaning too far over the rail at the edge of a very long drop. But today, it felt like the inevitable tumble was closer than ever. The alien influence was spreading, and the team was starting to feel like flies in a web, caught in the sticky strands of some cosmic joke with no punchline in sight. Doctor, Thalia Brisk stood at the center of the chaos, a general in lab coat and sensible shoes, directing her motley crew like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of doom. "Everyone's still alive," she shouted over the din of malfunctioning machinery, not waiting for an answer. "Remember, if you start hearing the voice of God, it's probably just the coffee machine again." Arlo was hunched over a terminal, bags under his eyes that could carry groceries. "This console's babbling more nonsense than my uncle at Christmas dinner," he muttered. "I'm half expecting it to start demanding sacrifices." "It already does." Greg shot back from his station near the beloved coffee machine, which was currently in the throes of a tantrum. "Just ask my stomach lining." Sierra sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by a nest of wires and equipment manuals. "Day who cares anymore of our intergalactic headache," she narrated into a recorder. "We're proving yet again that humans don't know when to quit." Yea, the irony of documenting their descent into madness wasn't lost on her. But it was either that or gibbering in a corner, and she was saving that for later. Thalia stomped over to Arlo, who was poking at the console like it had personally insulted him. "Any luck with our backup plan?" "If by luck you mean the universe's cruel sense of humor, then yes," Arlo replied, not looking up. "This thing's throwing more errors than a first-year coding student. I swear I just saw a line of code that said all work and no play." "Great. We've got a shining situation on our hands," Sierra quipped, tossing a fried circuit board over her shoulder. It landed with a sad little plink. "Well, if we're going insane, at least we're doing it together," Thalia said, trying and failing to sound optimistic. "Greg, any chance the coffee's not out to kill us today?" Greg tapped the machine with a wrench, a ritual that had become more like a prayer. "It's temperamental," he admitted, "kind of like me before my third cup." "Is it just me, or is the base getting warmer?" Arlo asked, wiping sweat from his brow. "If this is part of the alien cure, they need a new PR team." "You're not wrong," Thalia agreed, fanning herself with a manual. "The environmental controls have gone haywire. We're one step away from a sauna experience." "Does that come with tiny towels and cucumber slices?" Sierra asked, smirking despite the heat. "If only." Thalia sighed. She knew they were all battling more than just faulty wiring. The alien presence felt like a shadow pressing down, whispering promises of peace and tranquility, and she hated it more than the smell of burnt coffee. Their makeshift feedback loop, the clever little middle finger to the aliens, was holding for now, but the strain was obvious. The base creaked ominously now and then, as if it were trying to clear its throat before telling them to get out while they still could. "All right, team," Thalia said, clapping her hands for attention. "We need to push through this. The artifacts are still pumping out whatever they call their version of a lullaby, and we've got to keep jamming them." "Or end up singing Kumbaya with the aliens," Greg muttered, adjusting the coffee machine again, which hissed at him like an angry cat. They returned to their tasks, a weary camaraderie binding them together. They were tired, grumpy, and more than a little scared, but they were not going down without a fight. Not when there was still caffeine to be had and machines to swear at. As Thalia worked, her mind kept drifting to the bigger picture. The universe was a big place, full of mysteries, dangers, and apparently alien tech with an overblown sense of self-importance. She'd spent years preparing for the challenge of answering its call, but nothing prepared her for this, for the relentless assault on their senses, their sanity, and their systems. "Hey, Thalia," Arlo called, breaking her out of her reverie. "You got a sec?" She joined him, noting the concern etched in his features. "What is it?" "The interference, it's not just static. There's something else there," Arlo said, sliding over his notes. "I think it's trying to communicate, like it's probing for weaknesses." Fantastic, she muttered. So not only do we have to deal with an alien signal, but it's actively trying to get into our heads. Just what I needed. Nothing like a bit of mind games to spice up a Thursday. Sierra quipped from her corner, the sarcasm heavy enough to make the floor creak. If it figures out how to infiltrate our comms, we could be royally screwed, Greg added, not bothering to sugarcoat it. All right, let's focus, Thalia said, rallying them once more. Arlo, keep an eye on that signal. Sierra, see if you can bolster our communications array. Greg, get that coffee machine on our side. I refuse to die decaffeinated. They moved with renewed urgency, the weight of the situation pressing in like a 1,000-ton weight. The alien influence was a living thing, feeling its way through the base, poking and prodding, waiting for them to slip. Time passed in a haze of sweat and swearing. They worked like people possessed, driven by fear, determination, and a stubborn refusal to let the universe win. And then it all went to hell. The lights flickered, dimmed, and then surged back with enough intensity to make everyone flinch. What now? Thalia shouted, bracing herself against the wall as the base shuddered violently. It's the loop, Arlo yelled, his eyes wide with panic. It's overloading the systems. Shut it down. Thalia barked, but they all knew it wasn't that simple. The loop was their only hope of holding back the mind-melting barrage of alien influence. Sierra scrambled to her feet, fingers flying over her tablet. Trying, but the consoles locked us out. It's like it's fighting back. Of course it is, Greg muttered. Why should anything be easy? The base continued to jerk like a snake having a bad dream. The sound of metal shrieking against metal filled the air, drowning out their frantic chatter. Arlo, can you bypass the lock? Thalia demanded, desperation creeping into her voice. I'm working on it, he snapped back, sweat pouring down his face as his fingers danced over the controls. Give me a minute. We don't have a minute, Greg yelled, clutching the coffee machine like it was a life raft. The smell of something burning reached Thalia's nose, and she realized with horror it was coming from the main console. Arlo now. With a final desperate lunge, Arlo slammed his fist against the override button, and the feedback loop disengaged with a tortured whine like a beast denied its prey. The base stilled, the only sound the ragged breathing of its inhabitants. Everyone okay? Thalia asked, her voice shaky but firm. Define okay, Sierra said, her usual humor dulled by the close call. Well, we're not dead, so that counts for something, Greg said, letting go of the coffee machine, which burped in agreement. Arlo slumped against the console, exhaustion etched into every line of his body. We can't keep doing that. The system's too unstable. We need a new plan. Agreed, Thalia said, rubbing her temples. But for now, let's regroup and figure out how to patch this mess. They gathered in the mess hall, the usually sterile space feeling more like a war room. Plates of half-eaten food and empty coffee cups littered the tables, a testament to their ongoing struggle. All right, Thalia began, her voice cutting through the buzz of fatigue. Time for a status update. The feedback loop worked, kind of, Arlo said, his tone heavy with resignation. But it's not sustainable. The system's not just adapting, it's evolving. It knows we're trying to shut it down. So what? It's alive now, Sierra asked, eyebrow raised. Greg snorted. Wouldn't surprise me. The way this base is acting, I'm half expecting it to start demanding rent. We need a better solution, Thalia said, ignoring the look of grim acceptance on their faces. Something that won't tear the base apart at the seams. The team fell silent, the weight of their predicament settling over them like a smothering blanket, each one lost in their thoughts, searching for answers in a universe that seemed intent on denying them. We could try isolating the artifacts, Sierra suggested after a long pause. If we can't stop the signal, maybe we can contain it. It's risky, Arlo said, shaking his head. But at this point, what do we have to lose? Our sanity, for one, Greg replied, rubbing his temples. But it's not like we had much of that to start with. Thalia nodded, her resolve hardening. All right, let's do it. Sierra, start working on a way to isolate the artifacts. Greg, see if you can stabilize the base's systems. Arlo, keep monitoring the signal. If it changes, I want to know about it immediately. They moved with the kind of silent determination reserved for the damned, each step a test of their endurance. The base creaked ominously around them, an old beast nursing its wounds and waiting for the end. Hours passed in a blur, the team working tirelessly to keep the darkness at bay. They fought against exhaustion, against doubt, against the insidious whispers of the alien presence that sought to lull them into submission. And through it all, Thalia remained their anchor, refusing to yield even as the universe conspired to break them. Eventually, Sierra looked up from her work, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "I think I've got something," she said, waving them over. The team gathered around, a ragged collection of nerves and hope, ready to face whatever came next. "All right," Thalia said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Let's finish this." With a final push, they set their plan into motion, racing against time and the universe itself. The base shuddered once more, but this time they held firm, united in their defiance. And as the alien signal faltered, the shadow lifted, leaving behind a battered but unbroken team. They'd survived another day, and if there was one thing they knew, it was that they'd keep fighting. Because in a universe that seemed intent on erasing them, they'd learned to rage, to defy, to endure. And that, they realized, was what made them truly human. The base hummed with the persistent drone of a headache that refused to leave, a constant reminder that the alien artifacts had taken a liking to their brains. "Doctor," Thalia Brisk surveyed her team, their faces shadowed with exhaustion and a dash of despair. If the artifacts were a bad joke, then they were living the punchline. Greg was still battling the coffee machine, which had decided to exclusively serve what resembled tar. "I swear this thing's conspiring with the aliens," he muttered, jabbing the machine like it owed him money. "Probably," Thalia agreed, rubbing the back of her neck. "It seems determined to cure us of caffeine, as if the universe wasn't sadistic enough." Over at the terminal, Arlo was hunched like a man who knew too much about computers and not enough about people. "The signal's ramping up," he called, voice tinged with annoyance. "I get the feeling it's not sending out friendship bracelets." "Wouldn't matter," Sierra quipped, looking up from a tangle of wires. "We're more of the smash your enemy over the head with a rock kind of civilization." "Speak for yourself," Greg replied, finally extracting a cup from the machine that wasn't entirely black sludge. "Some of us are fans of more sophisticated warfare, like bureaucracy." Thalia sighed, the weight of their situation pressing down. They were outmatched, outgunned, and out of patience. But if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was being too damn stubborn to die quietly. "All right, let's regroup," she said, clapping her hands for emphasis. "We need to figure out how to stop this signal from turning us into happy little puppets." The team gathered, looking like they'd been through hell and back, which was accurate enough. The mess hall had turned into their makeshift war room, a place where they could at least pretend to strategize rather than just survive. "The artifacts are still broadcasting their peace, love, and lobotomy message," Sierra said, tapping her notes. "If we can isolate them, we might get some breathing room." "Assuming we don't get spaced first," Arlo added, his tone more sardonic than hopeful. "Or worse, turned into walking peace slogans," Greg muttered, grimacing at his coffee before taking a sip anyway. Thalia nodded. "Anyone got any bright ideas that don't involve us getting our minds scrubbed clean?" "Well," Arlo said slowly, "we could try rerouting power from the outer systems to boost the containment fields. It might choke the signal enough to give us a chance. And probably fry us in the process," Greg pointed out. "Details, details," Arlo replied with a wave of his hand. Sierra leaned back, feigning casualness. "At this point, I'd take a fried brain over an enlightened one. At least then I'd have an excuse for forgetting my ex's birthday." "Always looking on the bright side, aren't you?" Thalia said, though she couldn't help but smile. Gallo's humor was better than no humor at all. They laid out the plan, fragile and as full of holes as their spirits. It was a patchwork of ideas and half-truths, the kind of plan you made when you were desperate and out of options. But it was all they had. As they worked, the base's atmosphere grew heavier, the air thick with the promise of something terrible. It was the kind of tension that stretched nerves to breaking, where every sound made you flinch and every shadow seemed to move. "Feels like we're living in a horror flick," Greg said, wiping his brow. "Where are the cameras when you need them?" "Probably on some cushy job filming a sitcom about office workers," Sierra replied, yanking a cable free with uncharacteristic aggression. "Right," Thalia said, snapping them back to attention. Let's stay focused. We need to get this done before the signal decides it wants to play house with our neurons. Everyone nodded, though their expressions betrayed a shared anxiety. This was their darkest hour, and they all felt it. The kind of moment where you either find a way to fight or get swamped by the tide. As the hours dragged on, the base's ambient noises began to feel like a language of its own. A groan of metal here, a rattling pipe there. It was a symphony of discontent, and they were the orchestra holding it all together by sheer will. "Almost there," Arlo muttered, fingers flying over the keyboard with a mix of precision and desperation. "Just need to," the terminal exploded into life, not with the usual cascade of errors but with an alarming clarity. "Warning, system compromise detected." It blared in a voice that was far too cheerful for the situation. "Well, that's new," Greg commented, his sarcasm barely masking his fear. "Like I said, living in a horror flick," Sierra added, though her eyes didn't leave her work. "Stay calm," Thalia ordered, though her own pulse was racing. "Arlo, can you shut it down?" He shook his head, lips pressed into a thin line. "No time, signals adapting too fast." "Then we improvise," Thalia said, a determined glint in her eyes. "Sierra, can we speed up the isolation?" "Maybe, but it's a long shot," Sierra said, her fingers dancing over her controls. "And by long shot, I mean we're probably all going to die long." "An optimist as always," Greg said, grinning despite himself. "Less chatting, more saving our skins," Thalia reminded them, though her voice carried a hint of the same grim humor. The base's systems flickered like a badly tuned television, the lights stuttering in a macabre dance. It was as if the building itself was caught in the throes of indecision, unsure whether to collapse or to hold. They worked in silence, each of them hyper-focused on their tasks. Sweat dripped down brows, breaths came in ragged gasps, and fingers moved with a speed that bordered on frantic. It was a desperate, chaotic ballet, and they were all perilously close to the edge. Finally, with a triumphant shout, Arlo managed to re-establish partial control. "Got it. Isolation protocols engaged." The room held its breath, and then the oppressive weight in the air lifted, if only slightly. The signal was still there, still pushing at the edges of their awareness, but at least they'd bought themselves a little time. "Nice work," Thalia said, though there was no mistaking the weariness in her voice. "But we're not out of the woods yet." "Great," Greg said, leaning back with a groan, "because I was worried we might get a break." "Breaks are for people who aren't being brainwashed by alien tech," Sierra replied, wiping her hands on her pants. "We're special. Special in a destined-to-die horribly kind of way," Arlo added, though his eyes were glinting with a hint of hope. Thalia glanced around, taking in the team she'd come to trust with her life. They were battered, scarred, and a little broken, but they were still here, still fighting. And as long as they were alive, there was a chance. A slim, improbable chance, but that was more than enough. "Let's regroup," she said, voice firm despite the tremor in her limbs. "We need a new plan." They nodded, weary but willing. The universe might have thrown them into the deep end, but they'd be damned if they went down without a fight. "Right," Thalia continued, "let's see what we've got to work with." The base groaned in response, a sound that was almost mocking. It was a reminder that even the ground beneath their feet was unstable, that everything they'd built could come crashing down at any moment. "Feels like the universe is just waiting for us to slip up," Sierra said, her voice more resigned than afraid. "Probably is," Greg replied, shrugging, "but that's never stopped us before." "Here's to being stubborn," Arlo said, raising his mug of god-awful coffee. And in that moment, surrounded by chaos and uncertainty, they found something akin to hope. Not the bright, shining kind that lit up the dark, but the gritty, tenacious kind that refused to let go. Because if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was being too damn stubborn to die quietly. "Doctor," Thalia Brisk rubbed her temples, the alien signal drumming a relentless headache against her skull, like a band of spacefaring drummers on a bender. Her eyes flicked over her team, gathered in their makeshift war room, each looking like the universe had chewed them up and spit them back out. "All right," Thalia began, her voice a mix of command and resignation. "We've got a signal turning our brains into mush and a base that's as stable as a politician's promises." Greg, slouched over a mug of the coffee machine's latest toxic brew, grunted. "And that's on a good day." At least we know the universe has a sense of humor. Arlo chimed in, his fingers idly tapping the terminal, which was about as reliable as a used space cruiser. Thalia resisted the urge to laugh, mostly because she worried she wouldn't stop. "I've been thinking about the artifacts," she said, cutting through the banter. "There's something we're missing." Sierra rolled her eyes, the motion as eloquent as a lecture, like a functioning base and a one-way ticket home. "Beyond that," Thalia replied, leaning forward, letting the gravity of her words pull them in. "The signal, it's working in layers, like a bureaucrat's plan, but with a distinct lack of TPS reports." Arlo raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "Layers, so you're saying this thing's not just a blunt instrument, more like a Swiss Army knife," Thalia said, "with one of the tools being an inconvenient truth that might just blow our minds, literally." Greg snorted. "Great, I always wanted to be Swiss cheese." Ignoring the dig, Thalia pressed on. "If the signal's got layers, then maybe, just maybe, there's a flaw, something we can exploit." The idea hung in the air, as fragile and hopeful as a soap bubble in a razor storm. Sierra looked up from her tangle of wires, the hint of a grin playing at her lips. "And here I thought you only had a doctorate in making us do the impossible." "Surprise," Thalia shot back, her smile one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I minored in wishful thinking." Arlo leaned back, folding his arms. "So, we poke at the layers and hope it all doesn't go kaboom." "Pretty much," Thalia said, her casual tone masking the unease that was gnawing at her insides. "But first, we need to figure out how to peel those layers back without peeling our brains along with them." Greg perked up. "Sounds like a job for someone who's not already half-cooked." "Lucky for you," Sierra smirked. "We're not looking for volunteers. We're looking for survivors." As they plotted and planned, the base continued its unpredictable symphony of groans and creaks, the sounds a constant reminder of their fragile existence. It was like living inside the belly of a restless beast, and every noise felt like a countdown to disaster. Arlo's fingers tapped a restless rhythm on the terminal. "If we can cut the power to the artifact chamber, it might disrupt the signal, at least temporarily. And probably blow us straight to hell," Greg added, ever the pessimist. "Hey, I'm all for a good fireworks display," Sierra said, her tone deceptively light, "but preferably one that doesn't involve us as the finale." Thalia stood, her decision made. "It's worth a shot," she said, looking each of them in the eye. "If we don't try, we'll never know. And I'd rather go down fighting than sit here waiting to become a happy little drone." There was a murmur of agreement, a grudging acceptance of their lot. They were scientists, not soldiers, but desperation had a way of blurring those lines. With a plan, of sorts, taking shape, they moved with renewed purpose. There was something almost comforting in having a direction, even if it was towards certain doom. They split up, each member going to their station with the grim determination of people who had nothing left to lose. "Remember," Thalia called after them, "if you start hearing the voice of God, it's probably just the coffee machine acting up again." "Ah, the nectar of the damned," Greg joked, lifting his cup in a mock toast before heading to the power junction. Thalia made her way to the control room, the heart of their operation. The place was a mess, wires hanging like party streamers after a particularly raucous celebration, panels blinking with all the cheer of a funeral dirge. Yet, amidst the chaos, there was something almost beautiful in their defiance. They were a ragtag bunch, vastly outmatched, but they were still here, still fighting. Sierra was already at work, her hands a blur over the controls. "If I reroute the power here," she said, not looking up, "we might be able to create a feedback loop, enough to jam the signal at least for a while." "Good," Thalia nodded, hoping the confidence she projected would somehow seep into the circuits. "Arlo, how's the containment field looking?" Arlo flicked through screens with the ease of a man who'd spent more time with machines than people. "Holding for now, but it's a patch job at best, like trying to duct tape a leaky spaceship." "Story of our lives," Sierra muttered, her focus intense. Greg's voice crackled over the intercom, the static-laden sound as comforting as a mother's lullaby. "If your mother was a malfunctioning robot. Power junctions prepped. Just say the word." Thalia took a deep breath. "All right, on my mark." Time seemed to stretch in those final moments, the air thick with anticipation. It was the calm before the storm, the kind of silence that makes your skin itch with the promise of impending chaos. "Now!" Thalia shouted, and the command was like a starting gun. The base shuddered as the power surged, the lights flickering like a candle in a hurricane. The terminal erupted in a shower of sparks, and for a terrifying heartbeat, Thalia thought they'd overdone it. But then, as the power settled, something miraculous happened. The oppressive weight that had been pressing on their minds lifted, a collective gasp of relief echoing through the intercom. "It's working!" Arlo's voice was breathless with disbelief, the signals scrambling like it's trying to speak 3 languages at once and failing miserably. "Well, that's a first," Greg quipped, though the humor was tinged with awe. "I'll take garbled alien over mind control any day." Sierra let out a whoop of triumph, her grin wide and genuine. "Take that, you overgrown toaster." Thalia allowed herself a smile, the expression feeling strange after so much grim determination. "Don't celebrate yet," she cautioned. "We've bought ourselves time, not salvation." "Time's good," Arlo said, his eyes glued to the terminal as he monitored the situation. "Time means we can figure out how to make this permanent." As they regrouped, the atmosphere was lighter, the oppressive dread replaced with a cautious optimism. The universe might still be an unforgiving void, but they'd found a crack in its armor. "All right," Thalia said, her voice carrying a new energy. "We've got a chance now, but we can't let our guard down." Greg raised his mug again. "Here's to finding hope in the blackest of black holes." "Cheers to that," Sierra replied, raising an imaginary glass. They settled back into their roles, each of them buoyed by the small victory. The base was still a precarious mess, and the alien artifacts were far from neutralized, but they had a foothold. A place to start. Thalia knew they were far from safe, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she felt something akin to hope. The gritty, stubborn kind that sticks to your ribs and keeps you going when everything else is falling apart. As the team worked, the base continued its mechanical grumbling, but somehow it seemed less sinister. The noises were no longer an omen of doom, but the soundtrack to their rebellion. Arlo looked over his shoulder, catching Thalia's eye. "You know, for a doomed operation, this is actually kind of fun." Thalia chuckled, the sound surprising and genuine. "Speak for yourself. I'd rather be back on Earth complaining about the weather." "We all would," Sierra said, her fingers deftly untangling wires as if weaving a tapestry of salvation. Greg's voice crackled over the intercom again, a lifeline between their scattered stations. "So, what's next?" We threw a wrench in the gearworks. "Now what?" "Now," Thalia said, her gaze sweeping over her team, each one of them a testament to human stubbornness, "we figure out how to break this cycle for good." As they dove back into their tasks, the base felt different, alive with the possibility of success. It was a fragile hope, but it was enough to light their way forward. They were scientists, explorers, dreamers in the vast emptiness of space. But most importantly, they were human. And if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was refusing to quit in the face of impossible odds. In the end, it's not about how many times you get knocked down, but how many times you get back up. And Thalia Brisk and her crew had no intention of staying down. Not until they'd won, or the universe finally managed to finish the job. "Let's get to work," Thalia said, a steely resolve in her voice. "And let's show these alien artifacts just what we're made of." The universe might have been ready to write them off, but they weren't going to let it. Not without a fight. Because as long as they were still breathing, there was a chance. And that was more than enough. The control room was a symphony of chaos, with wires crisscrossing the floor like a game of don't trip or die. Thalia Brisk surveyed her makeshift kingdom of chaos, a queen with a crown made of fire hazards and faulty circuits. Her team, a ragtag bunch of misfits who were more comfortable with their gadgets than their fellow humans, milled about like ants on a mission, or possibly just trying not to step on anything explosive. Thalia ran a hand through her hair, which was doing a fantastic impression of a bird's nest. "All right, people, we've managed to shove a spanner in the alien signal. Now we need to make sure it stays jammed longer than Greg's patience during a team meeting." Greg, leaning against an overworked console, lifted his coffee mug in salute, the liquid inside looking suspiciously like it had been brewed with motor oil. You underestimate my ability to zone out brisk. It's practically Olympic level. Just keep it together until we've got this nailed down, Thalia replied, her voice threaded with the kind of humor you could only find at the edge of a nervous breakdown. Sierra, any chance you figured out how to make our temporary fix more permanent? Sierra, hunched over a station like a coder who hadn't seen the sun in months, glanced up with a smirk that suggested she'd either found a solution or was planning her next sarcastic comeback. I'm rerouting the signal through the base's outdated AI protocols. Figured talking to a cranky old computer would give the aliens an aneurysm. Just like talking to you, Arlo quipped, his fingers dancing across his terminal like a concert pianist on their 15th espresso. Sierra flipped him a very professional middle finger, which he accepted with a gracious nod. Think of it as giving them a taste of human ingenuity, she continued, or at least our ability to frustrate. Thalia felt a flicker of hope, an unfamiliar sensation she was sure was going to be rejected by her body like a bad organ transplant. All right, everyone, let's make this work. I don't want to end up as some alien's puppet. Greg snorted. I doubt you'd make a good puppet, too much backtalk. Save it for the victory speech. Thalia shot back, but couldn't suppress a small smile. The base creaked ominously, as if reminding them that any victory speech could be their last. Arlo looked up from his terminal, face illuminated by the glow of a dozen screens displaying more error messages than stars in the sky. The containment field is still holding, but it's like trying to keep a hyperactive squirrel in a cardboard box. One wrong move and boom. Appreciate the imagery, Sierra said, adjusting a connection. Makes me feel all warm and fuzzy. Focus, people, Thalia said, injecting some much-needed authority into her tone. If we can keep the signal scrambled long enough, maybe we can figure out how to shut it off for good. And here I thought my dreams of retirement involved beaches and bad cocktails, Greg muttered, before taking a swig of his toxic brew. Thalia shook her head, trying to block out the myriad of distractions. The alien artifacts were still nestled in the base's depths, their ominous hum a constant reminder of the threat looming over them. But the signal was faltering, and that meant they had a shot. A long shot, but who didn't love a good underdog story? Sierra's console beeped with an insistent urgency, and she leaned forward, eyebrows raised. Well, I'll be damned. The AI's actually making progress. It's like watching a toddler with a Rubik's Cube. Except the toddler's armed with a death ray, Arlo pointed out. Thalia focused on the screens, her mind running through calculations and possibilities like a gambler in a high-stakes poker game. Sierra, keep the AI running interference. Arlo, monitor the containment field. Greg, stop drinking sludge and start thinking about how we can use this to our advantage. And what about you? Greg asked, setting his mug aside with a sigh that suggested he was parting with a beloved friend. I'll figure out what we're up against, Thalia said. Something tells me these aliens didn't anticipate us being this resourceful or this annoying. Annoying, Sierra said, feigning innocence. Us, never. They worked in a tense silence, the air heavy with the hum of electronics and the creak of the unreliable bass. Thalia kept her focus sharp, her mind a whirl of possibilities and worst-case scenarios. She'd never been one to back down from a challenge, but this was one hell of a game of chess. Suddenly, a new alert flashed across the screens, the kind of warning that usually preceded disaster or, at the very least, a long night of swearing at machines. Arlo's face paled as he scanned the data. The signal's adapting, it's trying to counter our interference. Of course it is, Greg sighed, throwing up his hands in mock despair, because nothing can ever be easy. Thalia's mind raced, searching for a solution where there seemed to be none. But then, as if the universe had decided to throw her a bone, inspiration struck. If the signal's learning, maybe we can teach it something it can't handle. Sierra glanced at her, curiosity piqued. Like what? Our unique brand of humor. Thalia grinned, the expression sharp and determined. Exactly. It's trying to process human thought patterns. Let's give it something to chew on, a Gordian knot of logic and nonsense. Greg blinked. You want to confuse it to death. Pretty much, Thalia said. We're unpredictable, resourceful, and a little bit insane. Let's use that. Brilliant, Arlo said, his fingers already flying over his keyboard. We'll hit it with everything from paradoxes to cat videos. Sierra laughed, the sound genuine and bright. Talk about death by meme. Exactly, Thalia said. Let's overload its circuits with chaos. We might not be able to outsmart it, but we can certainly out-crazy it. The team sprang into action, their movements a blur of determination and desperation. They fed the signal a diet of human culture, from Shakespeare to sitcoms, injecting it with the kind of unpredictability only humans could provide. As the base hummed with renewed purpose, Thalia felt a surge of pride. They were fighting back, not with weapons or brute force, but with ingenuity and the indomitable spirit that defined humanity. In the face of an alien threat, they were turning the tables in the most unexpected way possible. The signals on the screens flickered, the aliens' attempts to adapt faltering under the weight of their digital onslaught. Arlo watched as the containment field held steady, the aliens' influence slipping like sand through fingers. "It's working," Sierra said, her voice a mix of disbelief and elation. "We're driving it back." Greg leaned back, a grin splitting his face. Who knew our crappy taste in entertainment could save the day? Thalia's heart soared, the tension in her chest easing as the threat receded. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd managed to disrupt the alien plan using the very thing that made them human, their creativity, their unpredictability, and yes, their sheer bloody-mindedness. As the base settled into a tense calm, the team gathered around the consoles, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and triumph. They'd pulled off the impossible, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the threat that had hung over them like a guillotine had been lifted. Thalia looked at her team, their faces dirty and tired, but alive with a spark that couldn't be extinguished. "We did it, people. We've won this round." Sierra leaned back, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. "Looks like the universe isn't done with us yet." "Wouldn't have it any other way," Arlo said, his voice light with relief. Greg lifted his mug one last time, this time in a toast. "To human stubbornness, may it always save our asses." The base, once a prison of anxiety and fear, now felt like a haven of possibility. They'd faced the void and spat in its eye, proving once again that humanity, for all its flaws and foibles, was a force to be reckoned with. Thalia allowed herself a moment to breathe, to savor the victory they'd earned. The alien artifacts were still a mystery, but they'd bought themselves time, a precious commodity in the vast emptiness of space. As the team settled back into their tasks, Thalia felt a renewed sense of purpose. They'd faced the darkness and found a way through, and now it was time to push forward to unravel the mysteries that lay ahead. Because if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was turning the impossible into the inevitable. "All right, people," Thalia said, her voice strong and steady. "Let's get back to work. We've got a universe to explore, and it's not going to wait for us." They sat in the makeshift war room, the kind of room that made you wonder if maybe the aliens had a point about humanity needing a good cure. The walls hummed with leftover tension, the consoles spit out error messages like they were going out of style, and Thalia Brisk, their fearless leader, looked about as relaxed as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. "So, we stopped the alien mind control with memes," Arlo said, stretching like a cat that had finally found a sunbeam. "I think that puts us in the running for the most unconventional Nobel Prize." Sierra snorted, her fingers still tapping at her console like she was trying to coax a confession from it. "If by unconventional you mean completely absurd, then yeah, we're frontrunners." Thalia leaned back in her chair, the creaky thing protesting like it had aspirations of collapsing. "I think I've finally figured out why they built this base in the middle of nowhere," she said, voice threaded with the kind of humor that comes after narrowly avoiding doom. "If we blow it up, nobody will notice or care." Greg, ever the connoisseur of doom and gloom, sipped at his mug of coffee, which by now was probably as thick as motor oil. "Look on the bright side," he said, his tone making it clear there wasn't one. "We've proven that humans are not just unstoppable but also unbearable." "Speak for yourself," Arlo quipped, his fingers dancing over his terminal like it owed him money. "I plan on being both." Sierra, never one to let a moment of levity pass unpunished, rolled her eyes. "Please, you're about as unbearable as a puppy with a new chew toy." "Exactly my point," Arlo shot back with a grin. Thalia watched them banter, a small smile tugging at her lips. It was good to see some of the tension seep out of the room, even if only for a moment. The crisis might be averted, but they still had a heap of alien artifacts downstairs, and a universe that seemed eager to kick them when they were down. "Okay, enough congratulating ourselves," she said, injecting a bit of authority back into her voice. "We need to talk about what just happened and what it means." Greg leaned forward, his expression the kind of serious that usually preceded bad news or worse coffee. "It means we're not as clever as we think we are. Aliens send us a signal to cure our penchant for violence, and we respond by confusing them with cat videos." "Hey, don't knock it," Arlo said. "If there's one thing humans are good at, it's turning nonsense into an art form." Thalia nodded, though part of her winced at the truth of it. "The artifacts might be quiet for now, but we need to be ready for whatever comes next." Sierra's eyes flicked up from her console, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe the real question is why. Why did the aliens think they could change us? What did they see that we don't?" "Probably a species that can't go 5 minutes without trying to kill each other," Arlo muttered, but there was a hint of introspection in his voice. Thalia sighed, rubbing her temples as if that might ease the headache that had become her constant companion. "Maybe, or maybe they saw potential." Greg snorted, setting his mug down with a clink. "Potential for what? The galaxy's most dysfunctional family reunion." Sierra chuckled. "Nah, we don't need aliens for that. We've got each other." "And this delightful hellhole," Arlo added, gesturing around the room as if the base had suddenly become a vacation destination. Thalia looked at her team, their faces worn but resolute, and felt a flicker of something that might have been hope if you squinted at it from the right angle. "They thought they could change us, but maybe it's about us choosing to change." Silence settled over the room, the kind that's pregnant with all the things left unsaid. It wasn't just about stopping an alien signal, it was about what came after, about whether they could learn from this or if they'd just go back to their old ways once the dust settled. Sierra broke the silence, her voice softer than usual. "You think we can? Change, I mean." Thalia met her gaze, the weight of the question pressing down on her like a supernova. "I think we have to try, otherwise what's the point?" Greg shrugged, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. "Maybe we just need a better reason." Arlo nodded, his expression unusually serious. "Yeah, and maybe the reason's staring us right in the face." Thalia looked around the room at the people who'd become her family in this isolated corner of the universe. They had faced the edge of oblivion and come out the other side, battered but unbroken. Maybe that was reason enough. "We've got a lot to figure out," she said finally, the weight of leadership heavy on her shoulders but not unbearable. "But if there's one thing I know, it's that we're not done yet." Sierra grinned, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Good. I was getting bored with all the alien mind control anyway." "Yeah," Arlo said. "Let's mix it up a bit. Maybe some good old-fashioned space exploration." Thalia chuckled, a sound that felt almost foreign after all they'd been through. "I wouldn't have it any other way." Greg raised his mug, the gesture half salute, half toast. "To the future, then, hell or high water." "Or aliens," Sierra added, clinking her coffee cup against his. The room settled into a comfortable quiet, the kind that comes when you know you're in the presence of people who have your back no matter what. They had seen the worst of what the universe could throw at them, and they were ready for whatever came next. As Thalia looked at her team, she felt an unfamiliar sensation unfurling in her chest. It might have been hope, or maybe the beginnings of something even more dangerous: belief. "All right," she said, standing up and gesturing to the door. "Let's get back to work. We've got a universe to figure out, and it's not going to wait forever." The team stood with her, their movements deliberate but steady, like soldiers readying for a new battle. They had faced the darkness and come out the other side, and now they were ready to face the unknown with the same mix of determination and irreverence that had gotten them through this mess in the first place. As they filed out of the room, Thalia paused, taking one last look around the space that had been both their prison and their sanctuary. The artifacts in the depths of the base were still, their signal silent for now, but she knew better than to become complacent. The universe was vast and unpredictable, filled with wonders and horrors alike, but they were ready, armed with the one thing no alien signal could overcome: the stubborn, irrepressible spirit of humanity. With a final nod to the room, Thalia stepped out into the corridor, following her team into the unknown. They had a lot to do, a lot to learn, but for the first time she felt like they might just have a fighting chance. Because in the end, humanity's greatest strength wasn't just its capacity for violence or creativity, but its endless ability to adapt, to learn, and to persevere against all odds. And that, Thalia thought with a small, defiant smile, was something worth believing in.